Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have a ton of, material to dive into. Like this is a topic I've been thinking about this year a lot, so I made
Mhm.
some notes and kind of pulled some material together, but I was actually really curious to hear um, kind of where you're at with the topic.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
what Ron's video, maybe all those posts, elicited and um yeah, I figured like do you want to kind of take the lead and talk about how you've been thinking about it lately?
Sure, yeah, yeah. Are we recording this? I think
I just hit it. Yeah.
okay, cool. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I've been thinking about um a lot about like how I've tried to improve as like when I'm just a player. And, because I feel like my GMing's pretty good. I think like I or at least like I feel like I can constantly feel or pretty consistently feel like in it when I'm the
Yeah.
GM. Like, yeah, I don't have this issue of kind of massive indecision or feeling like disconnected from the characters or anything like that. And sometimes I'll get into like almost like a trance like state or something, like GMing, like where I feel like I know exactly what needs to be said. I feel like I'm seeing things really vividly. But
Yeah.
yeah, so, but for a long time, I feel like when I'm just, just playing one character or whatever, it's been a real struggle for me to like feel like I'm in the situation or like I'm playing like a unique specific character.
Hmm.
So I think I'll just talk about okay, I can say like what I think the habits that I don't like that I do and I see some other people do.
Sure.
Um the main one that I really dislike when I do it is like the observer character who kind of like
Right.
passes judgment on
Yes.
the situation or the characters. I really hate it. I really hate when I do it. So I'm thinking about like like the character you're playing as, yeah, an observer of the world, um, who doesn't really have a self of their own or like desires and drives of their own. They just kind of like see the situation, decide who the bad guys are, and then like basically punish them and
Hmm.
fix the situation. So
Yeah.
it's like a story arc where the situation has flaws, and the only logical way to kind of develop the story and the character is by eliminating flaws. And it's the same with like that those kind of characters too. You might start your character out like, okay, this character is flawed, and I'm maybe they're like an asshole or whatever it is. Like they're an asshole or unlikable in some way,
Right.
and so they're defined in some way as the parts of them that are interesting are defined as forgive me by the way for going on and on, but I just
Oh
yeah I feel
no,
like I
no,
have
this
like
is
a
great. Yeah.
okay, cool. But they are defined in terms of lack rather than
Mm-hmm.
in terms of having or being. So it's like they have these flaws, but those flaws are actually in the story defined as lack because the only thing they can do is disappear.
Right.
And really, like the flaws disappear by being filled in with morality and like the right choices and
Yes. And there's a
like
pre-programming to it. Like we don't know how
exactly,
it's going to happen, but we know that this like flaw is going to be corrected in some way.
exactly. And that type of play, like you can play that kind of character
Sure.
in a way that is actually like not wrong play, not incorrect play, which is like the worst thing about it. Like, because you can be like, you can just play these characters all the time, basically in any context.
Right.
Um, yeah. So I've been trying to think about like how do you get to a character who is like a person, like who, like I don't think no one I know, and no characters that I like when I read a story really actually base their actions on like some morality or some like it or like a pure view of the world, or like just passing judgment. Like they're in the middle of a
Right.
situation and they make choices based on like desires they have or drives they have, just like a real human does. Like we're in the middle of something, we don't have perfect knowledge, we have like a weird view of reality a lot of the time. So anyways, yeah, so I guess like I think the thing that I've been trying to do, and I was wanting to write about this, but like I just didn't want to have to type it all out, and I wanted to see
Yeah.
what like your thoughts are and stuff too. Like the way I've been trying to address this and to get at a character who is in the situation. um I think the original approach was like, okay, I need to like logic out who this character is, what they're about, and then make logical choices based on those like parameters, as if I'm kind of like solving a puzzle every time I make a decision for the character. So it would be like,
Right.
okay, before a game, I can write out maybe what they'll do, or while I'm playing, I can get into my thinking mode and be like, this kind of person might do this. Let me choose what seems the most logical
Right.
thing, not in terms of like just a passive observer, but in terms of them and like these parameters.
Hmm.
But yeah, so then I feel like this felt really shitty to actually do, and often I would get back to like some kind of moralizing character or a character who ran away from situations, which is something that I have
Yeah.
struggled with a lot in the past. I feel like I don't anymore, but I used to really struggle with my characters just running away from
Yeah.
situations. So okay, so I'm getting to my like final bit of this like opening like statement almost.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the thing that I've come to is it's not about logic or um, something you can plan. It's actually activities when you're playing, like how are you playing,
Hmm.
that allows you to just integrate your character into the world
Yeah.
and achieve this feeling where you feel like you have some of the situation. Like the situation that's in your head is somehow being put into the game, or I don't know, or you're like painting parts of the imagery or more than just your character. And I think I was trying to say in that comment, it's for me has been little things like figuring out how much I can say. Like my example that I've been thinking about is we were playing The Clay That Woke,
Hmm.
and we had this scene where it was like my minotaur and this other minotaur. We were both bodyguards for actors in this like weird theater, and the like focus of the scene was the conversation that was happening between my minotaur and this older like ex-gladiator guy.
Real
And
grizzled guy.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, this like who I love, who's like one of my favorite characters in the game. And like you had really painted this detail about him and about what he was saying, what he was doing. And but I knew that there were actors in the background doing things. And you had chosen like what you were painting about the scene. So you were like, and I think anyone who's, the GM does this. There's suggestions and like ideas about what's happening that's not been like painted as vividly.
Well,
Um,
and I'd also say like you literally have to, right? Even if you're not doing it
you literally have
consciously,
to.
just the fact that there's
Yes,
an infinite amount of potential detail, and I can't
exactly.
talk for 30 minutes or we're not playing, right? So like whatever, like we have
Exactly.
constraints of time, so there's always going to be focus, even if it's not as
Exactly.
intentional. Yeah.
Right. So the GM has this kind of limit. But you were but like in that situation I was imagining what these actors were doing in the background, and I just said a detail of it um about like the actor who I was kind of the bodyguard for, and I just like, you might not remember it because it was like a small detail, but I basically just said something about the way he was acting
Yeah.
and like just this small detail. And then I felt like right after I said that, suddenly like how I could play my character just snapped into place.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that detail had nothing to do with what my guy says next, really, at all.
Right.
It was just like this moment where it felt like, I was like relaxing into the scene, and where rather than like viewing what I can say as a static set of panels with knobs on them that I'm allowed to turn, viewing it more as like a very, very strange and amorphous thing that I can feel in my gut.
Yes.
Because when I'm the GM, I have this feeling of what I can say is this amorphous thing,
Yeah.
and I can't really see it. I just can like reach into it kind of on instinct.
Hmm.
Um,
And you don't know
but
what
for
you're
a
gonna
long
pull out, which is the fun thing. Like
exactly
especially with when
yes
you've got a complex situation, there's some bounce involved, or the bounce could be someone saying something that you didn't expect, or the dice pulling something up, and you kind of reach into it, and sometimes you get what you expect, and sometimes you pull out something that's like totally out of left field.
exactly, and there isn't this feeling for me usually of like looking at all the options. There's this feeling of like there's like this I don't know. There's just something bigger and
Yes.
less understandable. And so yeah, I think that's kind of my main thoughts. Okay, give me one second. I have to close this window again. I just needed a little bit of
Yeah.
air in here. Yeah, so that was kind of my thoughts is like especially about yeah, the idea of what you can say as something that should be um we know that there are certain people have certain authorities and we know them, but still when we're actually playing, I think we understand them, we understand the authorities that are at work, but we don't want to like foreground that when we're actually doing the thing in terms of like worrying about if I say this, is this okay? Like I can understand that what I said in that moment in that scene was really a suggestion, but doing it doesn't actually really feel like a suggestion because you had like painted with fine detail this part of the scene, and then that was just kind of there to be grabbed
Hmm.
and to be fleshed out. And I don't think it would have been fleshed out if I didn't do it because it wasn't really that important, really.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know quite how to say it, and like, yeah, I don't know how to say it like accurately or concretely, but that's kind of what I'm just thinking about like how
Yeah.
new players like don't have a logical understanding of like the authorities usually like they don't know like they couldn't for example like name all the authorities very quickly or like or whatever, but they can if they're playing in a good environment with people who know what's going on, they kind of slide into their authorities pretty naturally, but then they take these opportunities to do things that are kind of outside or looser, and they just kind of do it by gut feel or instinct. Is my kind of what I think. That's kind of my assumption, and I think I
Yeah.
lost a little bit of that as just a player by I don't know how. So, anyways, or maybe that's not all new players are doing that, but ones that I've played with that I kind of
Hmm.
admire and have thought about like what are they doing that's letting them do this. That's the thing that I think is like there's like this hard baseline of like what they can say and what they can't, and then there's like these moments where they can kind of go outside of it for a sec. Um, so anyways, yeah, that's my I think that's kind of my take.
Yeah. So um I think I want to raise 2 points. One is just offering, an experience of mine. Um, and then another one is maybe offering some specific terminology from one of Ron's classes that might be
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the first one, on that point of new players, um, I don't know. I don't know that I would say that someone is doing something by gut or by instinct necessarily. Um, but I do think that the new players that I've played with have been willing to try things that
Right.
that are permissible, but that the rest of
Right.
us don't think about because of our habits and how we usually do things, like it's a blind spot. So the example I've been thinking that your story raised to me is playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess in person with two other people. We were playing, a dungeon in the city of Byzantium, and so I had a map of Byzantium out that was just kind of in the middle of the table. They weren't really, we weren't really referencing it, but I'd like point occasionally just to figure out where we were. And then I think also in like a folder, I had the map of the dungeon itself. And something when they finally got to an area of the palace that they didn't really have a good visual of. We were talking about how they were approaching, whether or not there were, riflemen waiting for them, if they could spot an ambush. And one of the players, very naturally looked over the map and said, "Oh, well, there's actually like a garden there, or there's like a park around the palace." So it's like, so yeah, we can just move up through the forest, use the garden as cover, and we can probably get pretty close on anyone who's watching, without at least into rifle range. And I was kind of thinking that it wouldn't have occurred to me as maybe as a player to do that, but it worked really well. And also, it was permissible, right? Because they didn't like reach into the folder and grab the dungeon map. There was a line that like we all kind of knew they wouldn't cross, but there was a space like within the permissible that I hadn't necessarily foreseen, but that they'd foreseen or that they'd been
Right.
able to use. And I don't know that that's
Right.
necessarily like instinct, right? But this player has never played an RPG before, and I don't know that they have the sense of like, oh, the GM's prep, like don't look at it, which might prevent some people from like really using that map. But for them, it's like, oh no, there's a map on the table, piece of paper, like we're all kind of referencing it. I'll get in there and kind of figure out where I am. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of a lot of the moments where I've kind of learned something new have felt like that. It's like, oh, there's maybe more to the permissible is bigger than I thought it was, than like this box that I've
Yeah.
drawn around myself.
Yeah. So I think a better way of okay, yeah, I think that's a really good example, and it makes me think maybe it's about maybe the word is not. It's definitely not instinct, but I think there's something to it of there's something about the situation, at least in the cases that I'm thinking about, and the one you're talking about. There's something in the imagery or the situation that I see, and I'm not sure that other people are seeing it, and I really kind of need it to be there. So maybe it hasn't been said yet, and you kind of get this feeling. I'm thinking about like how does it literally relate to just like how it feels to play,
Yeah,
which is why I'm saying things like instinct and gut feelings and stuff. But it's almost like this feeling of need or like desire or I don't know what, but like um there's something here that I feel like I know and it's just in my head and no one said it. And now I really want to say it. And I think the thing that that player said was probably something that they felt like, "Wait, I just realized this about the situation and I'm going to now say it." Um yeah, and so in a way it's like an experiment, but I wonder, like, as the player, when it's an experiment and when it's just like, I really need to just say this about what's going on. And I feel like there's a lot of times when I'm, being just a player. And in the past, there's been things that I felt like I need to say about how something looks. and I just kind of be like, no, I can't say that, or that's not my job.
Yeah.
But just by like offering this part of like my literal kind of like putting some of your body into the game because
Yeah.
it's like this feeling and you're actually like transmute. I don't know if this is too like weird or mystical or whatever to say, but like you're kind of transmuting a feeling in your body to the situation or the imagery. You're like, I have this literal feeling, and if I let out my feelings, I can start to play more effectively. That's kind of, as a GM, I think you get to let out a lot of your feelings because you're saying, look at how this looks, listen to how this sounds. Like, here's what this person says, here's what this looks like. And I think I got into this habit of being like crunched in and not, letting these literal just feelings out of my body. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm coming from in terms of like how does it feel to play and what does it feel like to like play successfully.
Yeah.
Um and then how does that contribute to just doing better and like yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like it might be just
No, that makes so. I
weird
mean,
or
I think once we think about uh when we say things in play, we're being creative, we're being artists, right?
right.
I think it makes total sense. And also that doing that would be it would feel like a little bit of an exposure, like, oh, I love
Yeah,
this, or this is like calling to something in me. Like there is kind of an emotional vulnerability to that. And I think
totally.
I mean, I know for both of us, having we both seen each other GM a ton, and I think we both put a ton of ourselves, like we've never GM'd a character we weren't just like really in love with,
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
or had like an environment that we weren't really excited to describe and explore. And yeah, I think so there's that element, and then I think the other element that I'd offer, um, and this was actually really helpful for me in because I think over the past year I've become a lot better as just a player, and I've been trying to do it pretty consciously. And one of the threads that has been really helpful was I asked a couple of people at the beginning of the year who had played with me, if they had any like critiques or tips, and then also what their experience of like learning and getting better has been. I asked you, I asked a couple of other people over Discord, and Ron and I were, I think, fairly fresh off of the Whispering Vault game, which was like at God, like 3 a.m. Arizona
Yes,
time. So I was like
yes, right.
very, I was probably playing at like 70%, but Ron pointed out that I was hardly ever talking unless prompted. And
Mm,
and I think that that's like a box. We were talking about the limitations we put on ourselves. I think that's definitely a limitation, especially when you're
yes,
just a
yes.
player feeling like you only respond, you don't initiate.
Hmm.
Um, and so I just really, and I realized I started to reflect on my GMing, right? And again, I think we both do this when we GM. Like, once a detail like pops into our mind as a response to something a player has just done, we're just like there, like, oh yeah, and then
Yes,
oh, and at that
yes,
moment, like, that music we were hearing from the bar like filters through the conversation. Like really
right.
excited to share that. That unprompted element of it is like so important, but I had not been doing that as a player. Um, and so I can kind of look back on a lot of the characters that I've been playing and see where that like unprompted input started to heighten because I was trying to do it more consciously. And I think that connects, to also your point about like that exposure to, like, if it's unprompted, then it's just me inputting that, I'm not just reacting to something someone else has done.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely yeah, because I think then I think that's where you get this is actually like a D&D syndrome, like a D&D game syndrome where you are so used to, because there's five other players, let's say, and you're in a big room looking around at it, and there's like three major details, like maybe a candelabra that has weird fucking candles, and then like a weird door, which that's like 30 minutes right there of play. And then you know and then like a gargoyle, which is like a huge, like, or a statue, like, no, don't put a statue that's life size and has a sword. um and then you're like maybe you've rolled initiative to like determine when you're going to speak, or maybe you're just speaking freely. But either way, there can be this thing where someone has had about 40 minutes to think about what their character is going to do,
Right.
but they've been so disconnected from just speaking and saying things and talking about like what their character is like, what they're doing, that like it can get to their turn in like a frantic combat, and they might think for a minute.
Yep.
And I haven't really experienced this too much recently, but I played games in the past with a bunch of players, and it is one of these like D&D type game things that happens where, yeah, someone is like, they should have exactly the right thing to say because they've had like 30 minutes to consider it, but yeah, they never get to just add something or just speak their mind. So when the floodgates finally get open, there's like, everything's dried up because all the ideas that they've had, or anything in their mind that they pictured, has been like just stuffed down while they're waiting their turn.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think, yeah, I don't know. That's just what comes to mind, is that kind of style of like feeling like you're waiting your turn really starts to, I
Yes.
think, eat at your ability to just speak. Because role playing is like a conversation. And if you think about a conversation you've had with someone who's maybe lying or doesn't want to say how they really feel, or if you're having a tough conversation and someone's worried about hurting you, everything is slow and really agonizing because no one is kind of, this literally like emotions and feelings are not being honored. And so everything's very blocked up, and people are thinking logically about what to say rather than like just feeling something in their kind of, their stomach and having it come out of their mouth. And I feel like you could understand role playing as like a series of literal emotional responses to what's happening. Like, even if the emotional response is like, you know, the emotional response of the character you're playing, I feel like when I'm playing well, everything I say or everything I do is like some kind of emotional response, or like a like grasping at something, like a beautiful description, or yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think the moment where you're stuck in logic and um trying to like think things out, I feel like is exactly the moment when you've lost the ability to like do cool things as a player. I don't know if that's like too far to go, but that's kind of how I, yeah, I don't know, the logic is probably not the right word, but
No, I
um
mean I think that makes sense to me. Like, on the one hand, hmm, so on the one hand, I think like, in a very casual way, logic is not the worst way to find your next step forward
mhm,
in scene. When you're lost, just asking, okay, like, what's around here? What would my character do? What makes sense? What's
mhm,
obvious? Like that stuff. It's really important, I think, so that you're not, um, you, so because what you're describing is not also like trying to find the weirdest, most out there, most stunning stuff either.
right.
But I think, yeah, with logic, it's like, um, well, I mean, it goes back right to the idea that your character is there to have flaws that become fixed, right? And you're going to like
Mhm.
figure out the procedure that's going to happen. And that's such a
Yeah.
different thing than like here's this kind of living character that I know some things about, but there's a lot of like uncertainty coiled within them and a lot of possibility, and they've just been put into this crisis. and I'm in this crisis, and what's going to happen. Like those are two such different modes.
Hmm. And I think like the thing I'm thinking about is the coolest moments to me, the ones that stick out to me that I've done are moments where I suddenly understand exactly what needs to be said. It could be like a detail of how something looks or what my character does next. And it's not really something that's like looking at a list of options in my head and then picking one. It's like suddenly this thing, and I feel like I'm getting way too like weird and mystical about it. So just forgive me. It's just how I'm thinking about it right now, and I just don't have the right words. But I, it's almost like this thing just comes to you as a player, and I think this happens. I think this happens to everyone, but I don't know. And it's almost like you have to say it, and it's incredible because some things that you feel like you have to say can shock and amaze other people. And often I think they are the most shocking and amazing things when you're like, I just realized something about this because it's you realizing it. It's
Yeah.
not just like anyone could look at the thing and be like, okay, this character's kind of a coward and a
Right.
bunch of people are running at him and his girlfriend is there. Oh, he's going to run away and leave her behind.
Right.
It's not that. It's like it's came to you specifically, or you obviously you have your mind has done something.
Yeah. But
But what I'm
experientially,
saying
it feels like the idea is, yeah, arriving.
exactly, and somehow these things that as a player, I'm interested in talking about how it feels. So that's why I'm using these kind of bad words like instincts. But to you as a player, it feels like it has to happen. But to other people at the table who hear you, it can be amazing. It can be a revelation. It can be astonishing because they've seen
Yes.
something that you did that kind of came from you in this way. I feel like the more often you kind of flex that, the your ability to do things that are really unique to you and really cool and that other people really love, I feel like it really improves you as a player getting at those moments. And my feeling is that getting to those moments is only possible through a constant access of the truth of your understanding of what's going on. Um,
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things I wrote down in preparation for this is like it has, and this goes back to like your observer PC as well, like it has to matter whatever it is, like what we're doing here, like has to matter to your character and it has to
mhm.
matter to you in
Yeah,
in some
yeah,
way, or like what are you doing here? If your character is
yeah,
just this block that things are bouncing off of and it's not changing at all, then like why are you even playing? Do we need that character here, or can we get rid of them and like you know do something more interesting?
yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that was a lot of my characters when I started playing more as a player, playing one character. So many of my characters, it would feel like, yeah, I was making these choices that weren't really like me. I was just kind of like, okay, this character's like this, so they're gonna do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's, I mean, I think it would be a distinction that's kind of impossible to convey to someone who hasn't had the experience of play, right? Because we're talking about the
yeah,
difference
totally,
between
totally.
like, what would my character do? And like, oh shit, I know what my character would do, and it's obvious, and I may not even perceive it as cool until I see everyone else's faces light up. But like the line between, like, you
Yes,
can only have that by playing. Like you
right.
will not understand the difference between that, by listening to this or like reading a blog post. Like you have to have it.
I think it's really true, and I think also there's something there about like technique versus some kind of aesthetic understanding. So, you know, a million times if you listen to a good amount of music, you've heard these what do they call these bands? These bands where a bunch of rock musicians get together and form
Yeah,
like an ultra band, and it's always horrible. It's always like the worst
right.
fucking music. they're all like so good technically at moving their fingers, but the aesthetic value is so low and so terrible. And I think, your aesthetic value, I don't know. I'm not going to make guesses as to how it forms, but I think certain people, you know, have aesthetic have an aesthetic that I want to see and I want to play with. And I think that's kind of, for role playing especially, I think it has to do, I'm sure, with what you've read, what you're kind of into in terms of like, books
Oh
you
yeah.
read or shows you watch or music you listen to, all that stuff, or like, philosophical ideas you have, I think are also extremely important for role playing too. For I think, and I've been thinking about that more recently, but yeah,
Well,
and I
it's
think
like
that's
what
kind of
it's what you said about like no one else could like logic out what the inevitable thing is, right? Like
hmm
you're not just an empty set of clothes. You have an opinion, you have judgments, even if they might not be like super uh, expressed and articulated yet. But like you have a self that's like looking at this thing and that is different from everybody else's.
exactly. And I think about like simple things like I love valleys with woods and jungles in them and like a river in the middle. And it's just like I love that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, things like that. Like, so I think I was trying to get somewhere with something, but I think I was trying to, yeah, it's like that aesthetic thing that you have built and that you continue building through just other things that you do is the thing that really comes out, I think, in those instinctual moments, because that's kind of your little world of, what you're interested in, what you like, what you think is beautiful. And that's, I feel like it's those moments where your brain has done something amazing, just grabbing into this vault or whatever. I don't know how to express it, but that no one else there can really do like you can. Um, and yeah,
Yeah, so I think one one lack of our conversation so far is that we've been talking about it in like a very internal way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I this all happens within the social space, right, of role playing.
hmm
And so I think a good question, well, so two things. One is, maybe my viewpoint would be that amorphous thing that we're reaching into um is like all of the spoken and unspoken and possible to be spoken things in the verbal space, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, so I reach in, I'm gonna pull something out, and sometimes like when I do something unprompted, someone else who has the authority is going to say like, "Oh no, sorry, it can't be that."
Right.
I've got something here, like but here's maybe a suggestion. You have to wait for that confirmation. So I think we can talk about like that amorphous space as something very defined. Um, it's all of the spoken and unspoken things between like all of the specific people at the table and their authorities. Um,
Totally, totally.
but also, I think that inspiration and that offering is validated by everyone else's response, and it often is a validation, like because what you've been talking about, right? All of the examples we both used have not been out of nowhere. Someone else has like spoken,
Right.
the outline, and then you've been excited and said like, oh, like we have to look over here. And so, in
Yes.
that moment, like you kind of validated everything I said. And so in that, I got a little inspiration, right? And I got to say like, oh, cool. So this is like speaking to Sam somehow. And then maybe that prompts
Yes.
something else, like it's actually this very communal thing, that we're validating each other and listening. And I
I think it's
actually, I don't know.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, and I was just gonna say like um, I don't know that something is speaking to you until you tell me, until you speak it back
Yes.
to me. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I think actually this is related to I think that idea of, role playing being a conversation, I think there's something there about when players are being, maybe, I don't know if the right word is timid, or are feeling restricted. I think this is where we get this strange thing where when the GM's characters are talking to a player, um, we see that character kind of say certain things or talk a certain way to the GM's characters, and we might get fully fleshed out conversations that are kind of interesting, even though they might not have be tapping into the full potential of if that player really felt like they could really. In the only word I've thought of is like transfer how they feel to the other players. I don't know how to say it
Yeah.
other than that. And then in that situation, when the two, say there's a couple people playing characters, when they talk amongst themselves, when their characters talk amongst themselves, suddenly something is like missing.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and this I've seen this a lot,
Mm.
and I think I see it a lot, like watching other people play, watching like recordings or whatever, where suddenly there's this weird change in how this character acts or what they could possibly say, or there's some sort of like the type of um yeah, there's just some shift, and it's just again, like, the only way I can understand these right now, because I haven't thought about like good terminology or anything, is just feelings, because there's just a change in literally how you feel playing your character talking to another player's character in these kinds of situations. Um, yeah, so I think it's related to what you said in a big way.
I mean, do you think it's the sense that like the GM, like their statements kind of weigh more than the others, so you have to take them seriously and like the detail of their words seriously, and then like when it's just Sam I'm talking to, then now I suddenly don't have to do that.
Yeah, so I think what I'm picturing is, again, I'm going back to the idea of a heavy conversation that you're having with someone that you care about.
Hmm.
Because I actually think it's the closest feeling that you can have to what it feels like to role play and need to say something and to not say it because of certain reasons that are present socially, right? You're having this conversation where you really need to tell someone that you hate when they do this certain thing, or like, or whatever it is, whatever the fuck. But you won't say it for some social, like, for some unspoken rule of the way that you're communicating with them. Um, Now I'm picturing your conversation with the GM and you as a player. It's like a conversation in the case where you as a player are kind of stifled. Maybe you're stifling yourself. Um, the GM is being honest. They're being very open, and they know what they want in this conversation, and you are kind of timid, and
Yeah.
you're only reacting to what they've said. So if they say they're really sad about something that you've done, or about something that's um, happened in their life, let's say whatever it is, you're kind of reacting to it, but you're saying kind of what they want to hear. um,
Yeah.
and then, you know the other conversation is a conversation where both, the player to player conversation is a conversation where both of you are guarded. So both of you are like reacting to the other person, and both of you are kind of like, there's no kind of, emotional presence there. There's kind of only reaction or whatever, or
Yeah.
the feelings are kind of being kept tight to both of you. So this is where you get, suddenly the players are talking together and their conversation is almost meta.
Hmm.
The characters are almost verging on having a meta conversation
Yeah.
about the game, and it's kind of like a big drop in the coolness of um, the narrative. So this is where you get, characters always have to just be off doing their own things because we can't have them in the same room because it's just not going to work. Uh, that's where you get this kind of play, because, and I've realized this before in my GMing and stuff, where it's like suddenly you realize, oh, we're kind of putting the characters in different places because the conversations that they're having are just not working at all on any level. They're suddenly getting weird.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's my take on it, and I have to apologize to anyone watching the video for all. I know I'm only talking about feelings and all this shit, but I don't know. That's how I'm thinking about it recently. So
Well, and oh, okay, so I feel like that raised up a lot of stuff, and I'm kind of figuring out which thread that I would like to follow. But I think, um, in the spirit of a lot of this conversation, um, I'm kind of curious. So I feel like, in our game of champions now recently, there was a session where I think you and I were struggling to communicate. So two sessions ago, session 5, right, where we're going to Mount Zhao to find the bird
yes,
people.
yes,
And I know you were talking about how you were struggling to like figure out how to play shot. Like you were being very open, right, about feeling like you weren't playing at your best.
right.
And so within that, I really I felt like that session was so important as a crisis point because I could feel how I think all of us were falling off in terms of engagement a little bit. And I
Hmm.
don't think it was entirely on you, but I think a factor in that was just that you were like trying to figure out Shala and the Naga, and when I like said things to you, I don't think you really had bandwidth to to validate what I was saying.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And so
Yeah,
and that creates like again like a fall off in engagement because I'm not getting the return on my creative input. Um, but it's so I wonder. So in session 6, which is the last one we played, though, it felt like such a at the end of that session, like we knew, oh, we're gonna keep doing this. Like if we had another
yes,
session 5,
yes,
I really think, I think you and I might have looked at each other and said like, maybe we stop here, you know.
right.
But like session 6, and it's so interesting because like we had that. Oh, it's such a fun scene, right? Where like Papa Gabo like punched the Naga and
Yes,
knocked you
yes,
out, and it didn't change anything. Like,
yes.
you know what I mean? But this time, because you were playing, because you'd kind of solved some of these creative blocks, that
Yeah,
non-response was like totally a response. So I had to be like,
yes, yes.
oh, okay, so like the Naga just isn't gonna fucking change on this point. So like, how am I gonna respond? How am I gonna work with that with my characters? And that was actually input. Where before it was more like Merc. Like I didn't know, you didn't
Right.
really know, I didn't really know. We couldn't we couldn't say things or make things certain because there was so much like when I say something to Shala, like is Shala even a thing, or is she just like this, this question mark, like an outline in the comic book that's otherwise like really lavishly drawn.
Yeah.
Um, well, so I kind of wonder like what was there anything specific that you did between session 5 and 6 or in session 5 and 6? Because like that was a moment where you were hitting those blocks and then like you came in and suddenly you were ready to kind of be inspired and you
Yeah.
did like and also like I think it's very validating for the concepts we're talking about because you like the stuff you said just became so much more vibrant too.
Yes.
We started
Yes.
getting that cool like interdimensional narration and just like cool visual effects. Like it really started happening in that session.
You know what? I remember I was thinking about this stuff after session 5 because I was like, Jesus, I cannot play these fucking characters. Like, this
Hmm.
is so hard. And I felt so, like, limited.
Yeah.
And for session 6, I actually said, I'm going to just give myself a lot more, not stop putting this leash around my neck, stop pulling myself back. And I don't know if you remember, but I was making the Naga's powers a lot more open and loose,
Hmm.
and not in terms of like, you know, mainly in terms of visuals, but there was like a point where I talked about like this weird wall that kind of appeared behind me,
Yeah.
um, that had some prophecy. Like it had like some, and this was what was cool about your character punching the
Because I was
Naga and
like,
her being like, I don't care, because there
yeah,
was a myth. Like she was like, look at this myth. You can't change, what I'm going to do. I cannot change
yeah,
this. And you punched me through the wall.
yeah,
I think,
I did. Because I was like,
which
that's
was the
cool.
coolest
Like, I
thing.
want to interact with that. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. So you smashed this fucking wall down. It literally, I the crazy thing is, I remember being like, I need to write something down. I need to figure out what they're doing, and I was just like, it's useless. All I can do, and I didn't. I didn't write anything down between sessions. All I thought was, I need to really stop being so afraid of just saying stuff that makes sense to say, that is permissible. And it's crazy because it wasn't like I, meditated on what my character might say. I didn't have an epiphany in the middle of that week about who Shala was or who the Naga was.
yeah,
I did kind of have this idea. I do remember thinking, okay, I need to make sure that the Naga is kind of. I don't want to care about if I think she's a hero or not anymore. And I was like,
right.
she can be this weird mythological thing, and other people can decide if she's a hero or not. Um, Mainly because I was reading this. I wish I remember the name of it, but some like epic, like some epic saga, like a Hindu epic saga that was like
Oh,
the characters were extremely brutal and horrible,
yeah,
basically to each other, but they were heroes and stuff. So I was kind of like, okay, I need to solidify that. But that was really the only thing that I was thinking about. And I again, if I'd done all that thinking and came in with that, but I hadn't done the like, let me show you the wall of myths, or
yeah.
I was talking more about like she had a really high dexterity value, or not really dexterity value, whatever. She basically had a very high bonus to defenses
Yeah.
because of these moves she was doing, and I was like, it's not because she's faster, it's because there's weird architecture appearing around her,
Cool. Yeah.
that you just can't see her anymore. Um, so yeah, I think it's fascinating that just those, like, honestly, I didn't even do that much crazy stuff. It was just a couple things, but I suddenly felt like, oh man, I'm like here and present. Um,
Y-
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this is actually encouraging from an improvement standpoint, right? That there isn't some big realization that happened. Like you were making a pretty small behavioral change, which is
yeah,
like saying what you do more and
hmm,
being less prompted. And also, I mean, I think something I noticed, is that you were really focusing, I think, on what excited you about the character, which I know
yes,
for both of us is like always the visual trippy aesthetics, right? Well, that always gets us going.
yes,
But you were like, what am I excited about? And then how can I like speak that into the fiction? And it didn't take a lot, right? But also then, that gave me something to work with my character because I'm excited about the gobos. I also like the naga. Gave Rod something to play with, and you start getting that kind of exponential call and response with it back and forth too.
yeah, yeah. And I think where the aesthetics come in is, okay, if I wasn't doing this kind of, there is a little bit, maybe there is a little bit of like prep involved, but it's kind of just who you are as a person when you're not playing. Like,
Yeah.
I was reading this. Well, I was reading this. I am kind of interested in like Hinduism and Hindu mythology, and there's like the Naga stuff is like pulled from like poor understandings of, intentionally bad misreadings of like
Yes.
Hindu mythology. So, um, I think because I was doing my homework in that sense, I was also doing some things that are kind of cool that you wouldn't normally see a hero do. I think like you're not used to a hero being like, okay, normally I wouldn't just kill someone who I just knocked out, because previously
Right.
when there was that Glauger guy, I was just like, I didn't kill him, and I was like, shame on you for thinking of killing him to the Gabos.
Yeah.
But then because I had been doing that, I was like, oh wait, there's like this part of the Naga that's like getting pulled into myth, and because of the readings I've done of like epic sagas and different stuff, I'm like, man, it's surprising how common it is in these kind of epic sagas for the characters to be completely fucking brutal
Right.
and immoral or whatever, and do shocking I forget. I wish I could remember the name of any of this stuff, but one of the characters in one of these tales beheads either his mother or some other woman. And in order to not be basically like damned or whatever, or completely, um, you know, cast out from that act, he like revives his mother again. So he's beheaded this woman,
Jesus.
but because he revives her, it's kind of okay. It's really weird.
Yeah.
It's like totally weird. And so, yeah, I think that's where the aesthetics do come in, where it's like, yeah. So that's kind of my take, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're talking about there doesn't necessarily have to be external. It doesn't have to be research, but you're just
Mm-hmm.
like consulting with yourself a little bit. Like on a
Yes.
different day, it wouldn't have to be like you were reading the epics, right? It could just be like, I don't know that I like, I've it's been a tough week. I don't think I can stomach seeing my character do this horrible thing. Something. I need a little happiness in my life. So let's see what we can do here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could, but it's all right, like kind of consulting what you want out of it, like what's going to be inspiring for you. And on that day, it was like, yeah, all these thoughts about you're reading and kind of emerging from that. On a different day, it could be something like way more amorphous or way more like emotional.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because one of my favorite people to play with in real life is my partner's friend, who is kind of like into boring, I mean, in my opinion, into kind of boring shows, doesn't really read interesting books. Um and I don't want to sound like an asshole or a snob, but whatever. It is what it is. I'll say, yeah, I feel like we just have different tastes in like what we'd watch.
Hmm.
She's like into like reality TV and stuff like this.
Yeah.
But then when we played Zombie Cinema,
Oh
um,
shit.
like a maybe 2 weeks ago, and heard like descriptions of some of these, some stuff that happened were like startling and chilling to me, and I was like, where is
So
this
cool.
shit coming from? Because
Yeah.
she's not into like, she doesn't watch horror movies. She's not like into like horror fiction. I'm like, where is this stuff coming from? I have no idea. So again, it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, she's also like a human that's interesting and is my friend and
Exactly.
is a complex person. So it's not like,
Yeah.
it's just, but it's kind of interesting what people can come up with who aren't like, she's not deep into fantasy novels and she's not like, reading a bunch of horror stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know what it is. I mean, but I guess it, again, like she's working with stuff that other people are saying. So it's a good point to remember that you can't just, it's not all your prep. That's probably like 5% of it. It's really about listening and what you do with what other people say.
Yeah.
um yeah, so I've kind of, yeah, I have a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like just the idea of being a person and having perspective and being aware and honest of yourself in the moment, like what
Yeah.
you want, right? I mean, maybe reading, a bunch of sword and sorcery fiction helps. I would think it does,
Right.
but, apparently you can do it without it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. I really think there's a strong correlation between, especially with this person I'm thinking of, um between like just being a person who's good at talking and listening to people and playing well. Like it's
Yeah.
really interesting. She's a thoughtful person who listens to people. And then when we go to play, it really shows. It's very interesting. Like aesthetically it shows too. Like um just things that you wouldn't expect someone to say. Again, like I said earlier, like someone who hasn't read a bunch of horror stuff or seen a bunch of, so like she had some description of like the specific way the light was hitting like glinting off like this zombie's teeth, and like you could only see this zombie's teeth in the dark of this place, and I was like, Jesus Christ, like I don't know, in the moment it was like so
Yeah.
perfect, that I would never have thought of. I've never said something like that playing,
Yeah.
so Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's so
yeah.
cool. Yeah, I think, this, I don't know. This conversation has not gone the way I expected necessarily, but I think I was thinking more in terms of like specific techniques, right? But
Mm.
I think we're really talking about like you use the specific techniques, whatever those are for you to like get to what we're talking about. Like it's not going to be the same thing for me that gets me to that like listening and unprompted space, but we're all trying to get there so we can like do this thing, which is like listening to what everyone else is saying and then like saying our own thing back to them.
Yeah, what do you think? Yeah, so what is it that you've been thinking about, like specific thing? I know you talked earlier about reflections after the Whispering Vault, but yeah, is there other stuff that was on your mind, like certain things that you've done, or like ways that you've found, like specific ways that you've found to kind of feel like you're improving, or
I think I I think there have been, but I actually that now that we've discussed this, I think that we've been in a much more kind of fundamental zone, and
mm,
talking about those specifics is not as like I actually think it's kind of distracting. And actually, I'm kind of curious to maybe go back and reflect on some of the techniques and see, now that I kind of have been reminded what they're for, to ask myself,
mhm,
like, which one of these are like really effective and which ones aren't. Um,
right.
yeah, because I know, like, just the point of like knowing that it has to, right, like the way I said it was, it has to matter to your character, like your character, it has to have some kind of impact on them. And then what you were saying about not just logicking your way through it, but playing within like that more creative, risky space. Um, so I know I kind of identified that as something I wanted to work on, and so I do have like some things I do after a session or between sessions where I'm like really trying to just internalize what happened and like really
Mhm.
make sure I'm not like forgetting something that should matter to the character, just through neglect. Um, but yeah, I mean, what I do to do that is not going to be what you do, even though we're both trying to like get to the same place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I do think though, like the idea of, because I think the first time I had really thought of needing to do this was you mentioning that you would do certain things between sessions. I don't even remember specifically what you said, or like maybe I vaguely do, but I do think that was helpful for me in just realizing, okay, that when you're the GM,
Yeah.
and in a lot of games you're going to play, you will have reflections between the sessions because you might need to like you know, do whatever the GM tasks are between. And I do think it is generally kind of good to. It does seem like a generally pretty helpful thing to have something that you're doing between sessions. But yeah, I agree that it's probably less. Yeah, it would probably be impossible to like say exactly what. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I know
yeah.
just like in terms of procedures, I will take just some time to like, is there any dangling thread, that I don't want to lose track of? I'll write that down. Um, for our game, in play, I was so focused on Papa Gabo and Lola, but I was thinking like, uh, Jumbo has seen his god get knocked out by the suit that he built, right? So
Yeah.
I've got to like think
Yeah.
about that a little bit in the next session. I'm like, I better
Yeah.
address
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
So I wrote that down, and then like the other thing I'll do is just along with the GM, right? I'll keep a list of like all the characters that are in play, because I know like for my PCs, all of these characters are like very vibrant and alive in their lives. But I feel like as a player, for me, it's kind of easy to forget someone I haven't seen in a couple of sessions. And I also know,
Hmm.
like when I'm GMing, it's the best thing when someone like is like, "What's that character up to from 2 sessions ago?" Or like, "Wouldn't they be here?" Or like, "I'm gonna go talk
Yes.
to them," Um, and so that's also something like just trying to make sure I'm not uh like neglecting parts of the situation, or like I'm ready when it does become relevant to say like, "Oh yeah, like okay, I'm gonna go see that character."
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's yeah. I think it's pretty interesting. Um, and it makes me reflect on what I do, and I think I like the idea of thinking about who are like what is my character thinking about things that aren't just from the immediately last session. What are things like? Yeah, I really like hearing. Yeah, I really like hearing what you do between sessions because I think actually one of the things that prompted me to try to get better at playing was because I was like annoyed that you were always playing cooler characters than me when I was like, no, this cannot keep happening. I need to like play some cool fucking characters and like do some cool things. Because yeah, you'd always play these, you'd be doing these cool things. And I don't know, I mean I joke about being competitive and most of the time it's a joke, but I'm also like I am a little like I want to do cool stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want people to be impressed by how I play. So I think yeah, it's really helpful, I think. And
Well, and I felt the same way. I mean, I think this is a good example of how we kind of like we teach each other in this activity. There isn't at a certain point no one should be the instructor or the guru. We should all be
yes.
doing our thing and learning from each other. And so I mean, I had the exact same. I remember like even the first couple of games we played together, I was like, holy shit, like Sam is playing these intense PCs, and they like that they're if they decide on a course of action, like they're gonna walk up to their knees in blood if they have to get through it, like
Right, right.
and so that was inspiring for me, and so I think we've probably like influenced each other in that back and forth.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, and I I I am interested in figuring out how do we talk about like how we played a bit.
Hmm.
Like how does that actually start happening? Um is yeah, I don't know because it's interesting to like yeah, what I mean, I think this is really great actually just reflecting on like what's eventually worked or I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like, it's just very rare to talk about um, how to make it really, really, really be awesome.
Yeah.
It's much more common to like just the lowest. I think that's actually one of the reasons I kind of slowed down posting on Adept Play was because I was kind of like, I feel like I want to talk about something more than just making it kind of go and work,
Yeah.
but I don't really know how to like talk about that yet.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
No, I know, my early posts were extremely excited just that the activity wasn't breaking down. You're like, oh my God,
Sure.
this thing works, like this motorcycle goes forward and it goes backward and I can turn it. Very exciting. But yeah, after that excitement will never go away, but I'm not as excited about talking about it. I want to,
Yes.
yeah, I'm of the same mind.